The coffee cup shook in my hand, and I didn't even notice until the liquid sloshed over the rim and burned my fingers. My granddaughter's voice on the other end of the line was barely above a whisper, like she was hiding in a closet somewhere, scared someone would hear her. "Grandma, please don't sign anything this weekend. Don't let them put you in that place." She was 9 years old. I almost said, "Sweetheart, you're being silly." Almost. That was 4 years ago. I'm 67 now, sitting on my back porch in Baton Rouge, watching my azaleas bloom the way they do every April, and I still feel the cold that moved through me when I heard those words. Not the cold of fear, exactly. More like the cold of something shifting, a door swinging open that you didn't know was there. Let me back up. My husband passed in the spring of 2018. 41 years we were married, and when he went, I went quiet for a long time. Not depressed, exactly. Just hollowed out. Like someone had taken a spoon and scooped out whatever it was that made the days feel purposeful. My daughter drove down from Nashville every other weekend for the first year. She'd bring her husband and the kids, and they'd fill the house with noise and football games, and somebody always asking where the extra toilet paper was kept. And for 2 days, I'd feel almost normal. Then they'd leave Sunday evening, and the house would go silent again, and I'd stand in the kitchen watching their taillights disappear down the driveway. My son-in-law was the one who first mentioned Cedarview. He brought it up carefully, the way men like him always do, with a spreadsheet and a brochure and a lot of talk about amenities. Independent living, he said. Not a nursing home. Nothing like that. More like a resort community for active seniors. My daughter sat beside him at my kitchen table, not quite meeting my eyes. I could tell she'd heard the pitch already. Maybe more than once. I said I'd think about it. He left the brochure on the counter when they drove home that Sunday. I didn't throw it away. That bothered me afterward, that I didn't just throw it in the trash. But I was lonely. I was 63 and lonely, and the house had 41 years of memories in every corner, and maybe part of me was already wondering if those memories were keeping me alive or slowly suffocating me. The brochure had a photograph of women my age playing pickleball in matching visors. I remember thinking that looked like the saddest thing I'd ever seen. I put the brochure in the kitchen drawer where I keep rubber bands and take-out menus, and I didn't think about it again. Not seriously. That was in the fall. By the following summer, my son-in-law was bringing it up every visit, always in that same calm, reasonable voice. He'd done his research, he said. The waiting list was long. If we didn't act soon, we'd lose the spot. It wasn't cheap, but my daughter and he had looked at the finances, and it was manageable if, and here's where he'd pause just long enough, if we liquidated the house. The house. The house my husband built the back deck on with his own hands over one very hot July. The house where my daughter learned to ride a bike in the driveway, where we held her graduation party under a tent in the backyard, where I grew roses along the fence until the deer started getting them every year, and I switched to azaleas because the deer won't touch those. He talked about that house like it was a liability, an asset to be converted. I'd nod along and say I was still thinking about it, and he'd nod back like we were two reasonable adults having a reasonable conversation, and then he and my daughter would leave, and I'd go stand in my husband's garage for a while, touching the workbench, because the smell of sawdust and motor oil still lingers there even now. My granddaughter noticed things I didn't. She was 8 at first, 9 by the time she called me. Sharp little thing, always has been. She'd sit at the kitchen table doing her homework during those weekend visits while the adults talked, and I assumed she wasn't listening because children never seem to be listening. But they always are. She started drawing pictures for me. She'd mail them. Actual paper letters with drawings inside, the way kids don't do anymore. I'd get one every few weeks. Little cartoons of our house with me in the yard, me and her at the kitchen table with hot chocolate. Once, a drawing of the two of us in what she labeled my real home with a big sun overhead and flowers that looked like my azaleas. I thought they were sweet. I taped them to the refrigerator. Then one arrived that I didn't tape up. She'd drawn a picture of Cedarview. She must have looked it up online or seen the brochure, and she'd drawn a big fence around it. Inside the fence, she'd drawn a small figure she'd labeled Grandma, and the figure was very small, and the fence was very tall. Outside the fence, she'd drawn herself and her younger brother, very small too, pressing their faces against the bars. She'd written at the bottom, in her careful third-grade printing, "We can't get in." I sat with that drawing for a long time. Then came the phone call. "Don't sign anything this weekend, Grandma, please." I could hear her breathing. quick and scared. "Baby, what are you talking about?" I said. "What do you mean? Daddy has papers." She dropped her voice even lower. "He printed them at his office and I saw them on the counter before he put them in his work bag. It said your name and Cedarview and it said—" She paused, and I imagined her squinting, trying to remember the exact words. "Transfer of property." Like a lot of papers, a big stack. My chest felt suddenly tight. "Did you read them?" I asked. "I tried." She sounded guilty about it. "It had your house address on it. And some numbers. Really big numbers. And Daddy's name is like the person in charge, power of attorney." The words came to me before she finished talking. I'd been a bookkeeper for 30 years before I retired. I knew exactly what kind of document put a family member's name in charge of financial decisions. "How long ago did you see these?" I asked. She said, "Last night. He put them in his bag this morning. You're coming for the weekend, right?" We'd had plans. The whole family was driving down Friday evening. A nice visit, I'd thought. End of summer cookout. "Yes," I said, "I'm coming. And baby, I want you to forget you ever told me this. You didn't do anything wrong, but I don't want you to get in trouble. Can you do that?" She said yes, but the way she said it, steady, like a little adult, it broke something open in me. 9 years old and carrying that around all by herself because she was worried about me. I didn't sleep that Thursday night. I called my old friend instead, a woman I'd known since we were both 22 and starting our first real jobs at the same accounting firm in Baton Rouge. She'd retired a few years ahead of me and spent her time doing what she always did, which was knowing things other people didn't. She'd done bookkeeping for half the law offices in the city for decades, and she knew every attorney worth knowing. By 8 o'clock Friday morning, she was sitting at my kitchen table with a pot of coffee between us. I told her everything. She didn't say a word until I finished. Then she said, "Where are your financial documents?" I showed her. My bank accounts, the house deed, my late husband's life insurance payout, the small investment accounts we'd built over 40 years, the retirement savings, everything I'd never thought to hide because I'd never thought I'd need to. She went quiet for a very long time. "What?" I said. She looked at me over her reading glasses with an expression I'd never seen on her face before, and she'd had 40-some years to make every expression at me. She said, "How long has your son-in-law been managing your accounts?" I said he wasn't. I said I managed my own accounts. She turned the bank statement toward me and pointed. There was a secondary access authorization I didn't remember signing. Dated 14 months earlier, during a visit when we'd all gone out for a long dinner and my son-in-law had said, very casually, that he'd been helping a lot of his clients update their digital banking access, and it was so simple now, just a quick form. Would I like him to take a look at mine so I wouldn't have to call the bank every time I had a question? I'd been tired that evening. We'd had wine. I remembered signing something on his phone and thinking it was just a convenience thing. It was not a convenience thing. She said, "He's been able to see every transaction you've made for over a year. And look," she turned another page. "There are 2 withdrawals here I'd like you to explain to me." I couldn't explain them. I hadn't made them. They weren't large enough to be immediately alarming. That was the thing. Not thousands of dollars. Hundreds. The kind of amounts that look like maybe you forgot a subscription, maybe a fee you'd overlooked. The kind of thing you'd wave off if you weren't looking carefully. But she was looking carefully, and she said, "There are 6 of these, over 14 months, and they all go to the same account." My hands were shaking. Not the way your hands shake when you're angry. The way they shake when the ground goes soft under your feet and you realize you've been walking on something that wasn't solid. I said, "What do I do?" She said, "First, you change every password you have right now from this computer before he arrives tonight. Second, you call your own attorney, not his, yours, and you tell her what you just told me. Third," she reached across the table and covered my hands with hers. "Third," she said, "you let him come. You let the weekend happen, and you let him show you those papers." I stared at her. She said, "You need to see what he's built before you take it apart." That was the hardest part. Harder than the phone call with my granddaughter. Harder than the shaking hands or the cold feeling in my chest. Sitting with the knowing and pretending not to know. My attorney called me back within an hour. She'd built her practice on elder law, which I'd never had reason to think about before. And she knew every version of what I was describing. She asked me to photograph every financial document I had and email them to her, which I did. She asked about my mental capacity designations, my existing will, whether I'd ever signed anything giving another person decision-making authority over my medical care. I hadn't, thank God. She said, "Do not sign anything this weekend. Whatever they put in front of you, whatever the reason, whatever they say, you call me first." My daughter and her husband arrived Friday evening around 7 with the kids and a cooler full of food for the cookout. My son-in-law hugged me at the door the way he always did. He was good at that. Warm, easy, like a man who'd never done anything in his life but love his family. My daughter made pasta salad in my kitchen while the kids ran in the backyard, and we all sat on the back deck watching the fireflies come up, and it felt like every other visit we'd ever had. My granddaughter caught my eye once across the table. I gave her the smallest nod I could. She looked back at her plate. Saturday morning, my son-in-law brought out his laptop over coffee. He had a way of doing that, making the pivot feel natural, like it had just occurred to him in the moment. He said he'd been meaning to talk to me about something, nothing urgent, just a few things he'd put together to make sure I was protected. He said the word protected like it was a gift he was giving me. He slid a folder across the table. I looked at it. I looked at him. I thought about my husband's hands on the back deck boards, the particular sound he made when he hammered a nail, somewhere between satisfaction and effort. I thought about my granddaughter pressing her drawings into envelopes and walking them to the mailbox herself because she knew I'd want something I could hold. I said, "I'd like my attorney to look at this before I read it." The air in the kitchen changed. My son-in-law smiled, but his eyes didn't move. He said, "It's just some protective measures, nothing complicated you don't need to involve." I said, "I've already spoken with her. She'd like to review it Monday morning." My daughter had gone very still by the coffee maker. She was looking at her husband, not at me, and I couldn't read her face. I didn't know, in that moment, how much she knew. Whether she was his partner in this or another person he was managing, I still don't know for certain, even now. He said, "Mom, I really think if you just read through it." I said, "I'm not going to sign anything without my attorney." I said it quietly, the way I'd learned to say difficult things over 60-some years. Not sharp, not angry. Just the way you say a thing when you mean it completely. He closed the laptop. The rest of the weekend was polite and terrible. My daughter stayed close to me Sunday morning while her husband took the kids to the park, and she tried once to say something about how he only wanted to help, how the house was a lot to maintain, how she worried about me alone. I let her talk. I said I understood she was worried. I didn't tell her what I'd found, not yet. That conversation needed to happen differently, without him in the house. They left Sunday afternoon. Monday morning, I walked into my attorney's office with the folder my son-in-law had left behind. He'd forgotten it in his rush, and the bank statements my friend had flagged, and the photographs of every financial document I'd sent over Friday. What she found took most of Monday to untangle. The papers in the folder were a durable power of attorney drafted to grant my son-in-law complete authority over my financial decisions. Alongside it was a document initiating the sale of my home with Cedarview's intake agreement attached. Already partially filled out in my son-in-law's handwriting, with a move-in date 6 weeks away. A date he'd chosen without asking me. A room he'd reserved without telling me. A version of my future he'd built like a floor plan, with me as the only piece he'd forgotten to consult. The withdrawals from my account, my attorney confirmed, were unauthorized. Small enough to avoid triggering automatic fraud alerts, consistent enough to suggest they'd been tested first. She used the word systematic, and I had to ask her to repeat it because I needed to hear it more than once to believe it. She filed a report with the bank that afternoon. The accounts were frozen pending investigation. She contacted the Adult Protective Services Unit that handles elder financial abuse, which I also hadn't known existed until that week. She told me, "You are not alone in this. This happens more than anyone wants to admit. It usually happens with someone the family trusts completely." I asked her about my daughter. She said, "That's a separate conversation, and it may take time." It did take time. I called my daughter 2 weeks later when I'd had time to decide how to say it. I didn't accuse her of knowing. I told her what I'd found. I read her the specifics, the dates, the amounts, the document with the move-in date he'd chosen. I heard her go very quiet in a way that didn't sound like guilt. It sounded like someone reorganizing everything they thought they knew. She said, "I didn't know about the money." I believe her. I believe she knew about Cedarview, believed his version that it was the best thing for me, maybe let herself be convinced more easily than she should have, because it would have made her life simpler in ways she didn't want to examine too closely. Grief can do that to a child. Make them willing to hand a problem to the person who seems most capable of solving it. Her father was gone. She didn't know how to be the person who looked after me. Her husband said he did. She let him. I don't know if I've fully forgiven her. I think I'm working on it. Her husband was a different matter. The bank's investigation confirmed the unauthorized withdrawals. Between that finding and the attorney's documentation of the fraudulent power of attorney paperwork, he'd used a notary he apparently had a personal relationship with, which is its own separate investigation. There were enough grounds for criminal charges. He hired a lawyer. They spent 9 months making it complicated. That's what money does. It makes things take longer. He pleaded guilty to financial elder abuse. He didn't go to prison, which I won't pretend I'm entirely at peace with. He was sentenced to probation, required to repay every dollar, and given a permanent restriction from acting in any financial capacity for any family member who could be considered a vulnerable adult. That last part was my attorney's doing. She fought for it specifically. My daughter divorced him 8 months after the charges were filed. She called me the night she made the decision. She didn't ask me if she should. She just said, "I'm done. I wanted you to know first." I said, "Come home whenever you want." She came for Christmas that year with the kids, just the 4 of them. My granddaughter helped me put up the tree the way we used to when she was smaller, handing me ornaments one at a time and telling me where to put each one. At some point during the afternoon, she climbed up next to me on the couch and put her head against my shoulder and said, "I'm glad you didn't go to that place, Grandma." I put my arm around her and I said, "You're the one who stopped it, baby. You know that?" She shook her head. She said, "I just drew what I saw. You did the hard part." I've thought about that a lot since. 9 years old, and she understood something it takes most adults a lifetime to figure out, that seeing a thing clearly and saying so, even when it's frightening, even when you're not sure anyone will listen, that's not a small thing. That's everything. I still live in my house. I am 67 years old, and I still mow my own back section in the summer and grow my azaleas along the fence and keep my financials in perfect order, because 30 years of bookkeeping means I will never not understand a bank statement. My friend comes over for coffee every Thursday. My attorney sends me a card every year at Christmas, which I take as a sign that she's become someone who actually cares what happens to me and not just a professional obligation. And that's a gift I didn't expect from any of this. My granddaughter is 13 now. She came to stay with me for a week last summer, just her, a special trip we planned together. We went to the farmer's market and I taught her to make my husband's biscuit recipe, and we watched old movies late and talked about things I haven't talked about in years. She's going to be something extraordinary when she grows up. She already is. On the last night of her visit, we were sitting on the back deck after dinner, the same deck my husband built, and she said, "Grandma, are you happy?" I looked at my yard in the summer evening light, the azaleas going soft at the edges, the fireflies just starting. I thought about all the versions of this life I almost lost. The house, the independence, the ordinary sacred Tuesday mornings with coffee, and no one telling me what was best for me. I said, "Yes, baby." Really, genuinely happy. She nodded like she'd needed to hear that confirmed. Then she said, "Good. That's what I wanted to know. If you're listening to this and you have a family member, a parent, a grandparent, an aunt or uncle living alone, please pay attention. Not in a hovering way, not in a taking over way. Just the way my granddaughter paid attention. She didn't try to fix anything. She noticed. She drew what she saw. She made one phone call to tell the person who needed to know. And if you're the one living alone, and someone in your life is talking a lot about what's best for you, about protecting you, about simplifying things, trust yourself. Get your own attorney. One that's yours, not theirs. Have your own friends who will sit at your kitchen table and read the fine print. And if a child in your life tries to tell you something that doesn't quite make sense yet, something that seems too big for them to be carrying, listen. They are not imagining it. They see what we have learned to look away from. I almost looked away. Thank God I didn't.